Okay, we can start, Matthias. All right, you are welcome, Renata, and the audience. Yeah, this is the amberNetworkFestival keynote or thematic speech by Renata Salecl tonight. amberNetworkFestival is actually the continuation of amberFestival, which we had 9 editions between 2007 and 2015 in Istanbul. And it was a thematic festival, and we had, as I said, 9 editions, but the 10th edition was not possible after the changes of time. I mean, political and economical changes. But only now, this year, we had, again, a chance to make Amber Festival as amberNetworkFestival in a different format, which is actually we long for a long time, from 2008, since we established founded the Amber Network. This is now more interesting for us. I mean, and it is a distributed festival and collaboratively created festival. There are several network members, and all the content, all the programs of the festival provided by them, including amberPlatform İstanbul, Darağaç İzmir, New Media Society Tehran, DAH Project Shiraz, KounAktif Casablanca, BAAB Khartoum, Shahraban Baalbek, Bishkek Contemporary Bishkek, and ADEF Cairo. This festival produced by Oyoun in Berlin and funded by Berlin Senate's Hauptstadtkulturfonds. This actually, the theme of the festival, as you already seen here on the screen, post-digital ignorance. I had a chance to work together or to collaborate with Renata Salecl in one of the European projects that we were as a partner as a amberPlatform. And during those talks and events of the festival, I had a chance to hear the article of the first article, maybe now, which is now a book of on ignorance. So after that, it became the theme of the festival. Actually, it was 2017. So it was very early beginning of this, I guess, your story with the book, maybe. And in 2017, we didn't have a chance to realize the festival. But since then, whenever we could have done it, it would have been the theme. So it was this year only, and with a good coincidence that by the end of this 2020, the book also published. So now I have this link here in the chat. You can click and go to the book by Princeton Press. And there is another nice offer by Princeton Press and Renata, who can use this. I mean, who wants to buy this book will have a 25% discount by this code till the end of the month. So thank you for this kind offer as well. And Renata Salecl, a philosopher and sociologist, is a professor at the School of Law at Baalbek College, University of London, and senior researcher at the Institute of Criminology at the Faculty of Law in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Her other books are actually, which are also translated in many languages, but also in Turkish, Tyranny of Choice and On Anxiety. And now, A Passion for Ignorance, a Turkish edition of this, also on the way. And again, thank you, Renata, and I'm leaving the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
One more warning. We are using BBB, and you yourself control your screen. So if you just click on the top right corner of this post-digital ignorance poster. You can get rid of it, and you can see the speaker in full size. Thank you.
Thank you, Ikmal, for the invitation, and thank you for the collaboration. We have been collaborating now for 4 years under the umbrella of Transmaking, the EU-funded Marie Curie project, and it was through this collaboration that we have discussed how to sort of bring ignorance together with the new social media, how to think with the help of the concept of ignorance, also our world of technology, big data, and so on. I will give you kind of a little bit of an introduction to how I came to the idea of ignorance. When I started working on the topic, I quickly realized that every era, every time appears to have different ignorances. So that ignorance is not a universal concept, and that in some way humanity has been going through various types of definitions of what is ignorance. And also ignorance is quite often taken in a pejorative way. We accuse others that they are ignorant, while we would rarely speak about our own ignorance. Now, ignorance is often perceived as the lack of knowledge or the lack of desire to know. But in psychoanalytic setting, ignorance has been taken as kind of an underside of our desire to know. Jacques Lacan, French psychoanalyst, coined the term a passion for ignorance after, in the 50s, he was listening to some Buddhist studies, lectures about Buddhism at Sorbonne. He was just curious at that time about Buddhism. And when he was learning about the concept of ignorance in Buddhism, he started thinking that maybe actually this term is very useful to understand a dynamic which is happening in psychoanalysis. And that is when a patient comes to the therapist, to the analyst, with the desire to know, saying, I want to know what is the core of my suffering, for example. But then Lacan said, immediately you could see that the subject will do everything not to know. So sometimes we claim we want to know, but immediately we close our eyes and start doing everything not to come close to the core of what is traumatic. So ignorance should not be taken simply as something negative. It should not have that pejorative character, because many times for us people, ignorance is a strategy of survival. When we are going through traumatic experience, sometimes closing your eyes might be temporarily beneficial, which is why people who are studying ignorance in the psychological domain are cautioning that we should not be throwing certain traumatic information onto the people. In a way, we should allow people to open up themselves to the knowledge or information that might be too much for them to bear. Now, we therefore have two types of ignorances. One type is an individual, an individual way of how we are handling knowledge, negation, denial, and ignorance. And then we have the social level. And in the social level, we have all kinds of strategic ignorances. Now, quite often, we are kept in the dark because people of power do not want that we know something. Now, this strategic ignorance has also changed throughout, the history, and it has always played an important role for authorities in power. So often authorities keep us in dark. Now, people who have studied denial in the social context have noticed then when a crisis happens in society, let's say that you have a major ecological catastrophe, quite often, denial or other forms of closing your eyes, ignoring the problem, or pretending that you don't know, are strategies that are employed. For example, when in 2010 British Petroleum had the accident in the Gulf of Mexico, when the oil spill happened, at that time no one in British Petroleum seemed to know anything about it. Now, the question, of course, emerged: was it that truly people in power didn't know, what was the accident, how damaging, ecologically damaging the accident was? Was it maybe that people lower in the hierarchies knew and then didn't want to inform others? Or was it maybe, that the majority of people in charge actually pretended that they did not know, that in some way they embraced ignorance strategically, just to prevent them to be culpable or to deal with the repercussions of the ignorance. Now, there are still other ways to think about ignorance, and that is, if ignorance is not, linked simply to knowledge or the lack to know, the lack to desire, the desire to know, we can also see that ignorance plays an important role in the intersubjective relationships, which is why in my project I started looking also at ignorance in the interpersonal relationships, where we refuse to notice certain behavior or a person. So quite often people feel ignored in today's world, and my question became whether we can think together this ignorance as the relationship to knowledge and ignorance as the interpersonal feeling when we are ignoring other people, or when ourselves we feel ignored. Now, of course, we can say that here we are on two different levels. One is, the level where we deal with knowledge, and the other one is much more a kind of a psychological, level where, it is very hard to pinpoint what does it actually mean that to feel ignored, or what does it mean that when we are ignoring others. But my idea was that in today's society, the fact that more and more people are feeling ignored is contributing to the type of ignorance that we can observe in today's world, especially in the domain of social media. Now, in the conclusion of my book, I was sort of tackling the question of, the obsession that we have today with sharing fake news or conspiracy theories. And there I realized that this feeling of being ignored plays an important role. Some quite contemporary research, which has sort of looked at, the behavior of people who are passionately sharing fake news or conspiracy theory, questioned whether people who are sharing these theories actually believe in the knowledge that they are sharing. So, do people who on the social media are sharing conspiracy theories or fake news believe in this news? Now, the surprising answer of some of the research was not. That quite a lot of people who are sharing fake news do not believe in this news themselves, or also do not themselves strongly identify with conspiracy theories if they are sharing these theories around. What they are gaining through sharing, and what they're getting from clicks they're getting, or upvotes, they are getting on the social media or transmission that is going through social media with their help is a certain emotional gain. They're often feeling, these people who are, anonymous, quite often anonymous people who are very active in sharing, fake news and conspiracy theories, they're often feeling ignored. They're complaining that they are not noticed. And, when they are sharing certain news, which is then, shared again or upvoted, liked, they are getting recognition. First, they are getting recognition from their group, but they're also getting a certain recognition when they provoke anger, pain on the other side. Let's say that they are sharing certain political, provocative political ideas, targeting someone from the opposite political spectrum. And when they're getting response, let's say angry response, they get certain emotional satisfaction. So here we can see how, the question whether something is true or not, whether something is a fact or not, plays, a second fiddle, since for people, the fact that they are recognized or that they are getting recognized, and that fact that they are steering certain emotions is playing a more important role. Now, some research also showed that, some people who are spreading passionately conspiracy theories are also hoping that, there will be sort of like a kind of a reset of society, like burning the world as we know it to the ground is for some, a fantasy they are playing with. Of course, hoping they themselves will survive and, continue living. But that kind of a desire for starting anew also reminds us of psychoanalytic reasoning. Already Sigmund Freud was, talking about Eros and Thanatos being, the two types of energies, drives that are at work not only in individual's life but in society as such. And he was questioning whether, Eros, a certain kind of a push for a renewal, for continuation of life, will win over these attractive tendencies in society as such, or also in individual life. We can see this, battle going on quite often. And in some cases, the self-destruction is winning. Now, going back to ignorance, we can say that in our individual life, ignorance is also an important ingredient in interpersonal relationships. Let's say love. Love, requires often, at least in the first stages, a certain blindness, closing of your eyes, not seeing too much. So the fantasy linked to romantic love requires that we do not know too much about the other, so that we can create a story that keeps our love alive. Here we can say that new social media and even simple text messages are contributing a lot to the fantasy. Quite often, the fantasy is stronger if there is a distance, if we do not have too much of an access to the beloved. Then we can create our own stories, which allows us to continue being enchanted by the person. Now, there's also quite a lot of ignorance at work in child rearing. We are even taught that we have to ignore naughty behavior of children, or that we have to sort of sometimes even use ignorance as punishment, like time out that we use for small children is a form of ignorance. Now, the capacity to ignore is an essential part of intimate relationships and also of social relationships. And sometimes it is the lack of this capacity that can be problematic in our lives. I remember reading an interview with a woman who has one of the highest IQs in the United States. And I remember she was asked, how come being so intelligent, she didn't become like a top scientist or create like an amazing career? And she said that actually she had a problem that she could not ignore information. So she knows a lot about a lot of things, but she could not specialize, since specializing in something, some particular knowledge, requires that we ignore other types of information, at least, temporarily. So this woman could memorize a huge amount of data, but she could not easily judge, what is relevant, what isn't in a given situation. So the career of this woman was blocked because she was unable to choose a special type of knowledge, she would focus on. Now, Confucius pointed out that real knowledge pertains to knowing the extent of one's ignorance. Similarly, Thomas Jefferson pointed out that a person who knows how little he or she knows. And, Benjamin Franklin also pointed out that it is not a shame to be ignorant, but, a shame is to be unwilling to learn. I was raised in a former socialist country, Yugoslavia, and I remember in school we were constantly told that our president, Marshal Tito, he was known to encourage knowledge, and so he was known to teach us, you have to learn. Now, very similar three words actually were used before him by Lenin, who also, whenever he met young people or students, used these three words. You have to learn. Now, in contemporary society, there was a change that, leaders in some way stopped encouraging this learning or, the pursuit of knowledge. And we can say that some leaders, like former American President Donald Trump, even in a way made kind of made being proud of being ignorant. So in some way, Trump and similar leaders did not feel ashamed for the lack of knowledge. And in a strange way, they opened up the doors for identification with a lot of people, people who maybe did not cherish knowledge so much in their lives. When you have a leader who is not ashamed for his lack of knowledge, it is easier, for some people to identify with him or her. Now, I remember years ago in one of the British episodes, Big Brother, there was a woman who won in one of the episodes, and she became super famous after she did not know where the town Cambridge is. She did not know in which country Cambridge is located. Now, she was from the UK, and in a way, her lack of knowledge propelled her in some way to the sort of like quite a stratosphere of fame at her time, because for a lot of people, this lack of knowledge and kind of the lack of feeling ashamed for not knowing such a banal thing was a point of identification. So when someone does not know and does not feel, shame for the lack of knowledge, that can help establishing certain social bonds. Now, I already mentioned that ignorance has been quite a lot studied in the context of other terms like negation or denial, for example. There's another term that is important in this context, and that is the term protective stupidity. Now, this term was introduced by George Orwell, who in his dystopian novel 1984 linked it to the term he uses in the novel, the term crime stop. Now, Orwell declared that in some way protective stupidity means that we are stopping short, we are sort of like stopping our train of thought when we come close to something dangerous. And he says that on the social domain, in the social domain, we also have, powers which are sort of failing to see logical errors, or, are kind of misunderstanding simple arguments. So in a way, for the people in power, sometimes, it is important that they appear protectively stupid. Now, we can see many, examples among contemporary state leaders, but also in everyday life, people are using protective stupidity, or we can call protective stupidity also deliberate ignorance. I remember a friend of mine was dealing with a traumatic situation in his life. A family was in crisis because the mother was ill with incurable cancer. Now, the family decided every Friday to go into a kind of a protective stupidity mode, since they decided from Friday until Monday, they will not talk about illness, and they will pretend as everything is back to normal. Now, the woman was still incurably ill, but this pretense gave them over the weekend at least an illusion of normality. Now, sometimes ignorance can be also linked to self-deception. Leonardo da Vinci observed that sometimes the greatest deception is our own opinion. And Upton Sinclair added that it is difficult for a person to understand something when his or her salary depends on not understanding it. Now, in literature, we see many examples of how useful protective stupidity, ignorance, or denial can be. An example can be Henrik Ibsen, who in his work, The Wild Duck, pointed out that if we deprive the average man of his lies, we often take away his happiness. Now, sociologists and psychologists have also studied self-deceptions, and they have observed that many times people are, completely unrealistic about themselves, especially about their abilities, and that they actually do not have accurate self-knowledge. In the early 90s, one research on self-deception in academia found out that 94% of American university professors thought that they were better at their job than their colleagues. A very similar study was done among high school students, and here too, a majority of students thought that they were above average. And even 25% of students in one survey thought that they are the top 1% of students in their class. Now, how often do we hear people admitting that they do not know something? When was the last time that you heard a high-ranking politician saying that he or she does not know what might be the outcome of the policy that they are promoting? Or when did you hear a doctor admitting that he or she does not know, how does the particular drug actually affect the person? Now, a number of authors have done a kind of a taxonomy of ignorance. There were, some people are saying that one type of ignorance that we can observe are the so-called known unknowns. So these are things that we know that we don't know. There are, unknown unknowns, the things we don't know. Then, of course, then there are things we think that we know, but we actually don't. These are usually perceived as errors. And then there are things we don't know, we know, kind of tacit knowns. And quite often in societies, we also observe taboos, forbidden knowledge. And as I mentioned already before, deniers. American theorist Nancy Tuana offered 4 domains of ignorance. She described 4 domains. First were kind of knowings. First type of ignorance is knowing that we do not know, yet we do not care to know. The second would be that we don't know that we do not know. Third would be not knowing because privileged others do not want us to know. And the fourth would be willful ignorance. Now, in the history of philosophy, it was Nicholas de Cusanus, who was well known in the medieval times to study ignorance, and he promoted a term learned ignorance. The idea of this term is that the subject, in a way, should come to a state of, understanding the limits of his not knowing, his or her not knowing. Now, the idea of Nicholas de Cusa was that we should desire to acknowledge what we do not know. Since for him, the essence of the things was, unknown, incomprehensible in its fullness. This kind of a learned ignorance should be, the goal of subjectivity. As I mentioned before, in psychoanalysis, ignorance plays a very important role. Freud first looked at denial in the context of terms like denial. He also analyzed negation. And in one of his examples, he speaks about a person coming to analysis, speaking about some traumatic dream, and then at some point saying, the woman whom I mentioned in my dream is not my mother. Now, Freud's point was that no one said that the woman in the dream was this person's mother. Why did the person have the need to negate something? And Freud gave a kind of a curious explanation. For him, this negation was an opening up, almost like a moment of freedom, where something that was pushed aside, something that was repressed, maybe will come out into the consciousness of this person. So we often deny or negate something, and through this denial and negation, we're actually saying more than we intended. Maybe, through denial and negation, something that we tried to push out of our consciousness is coming back, like some kind of a return of the repressed. So a lot of post-Freudian psychoanalysts saw a value in denial. a value, for example, for the psychoanalyst to listen especially carefully when someone denies something. Sometimes, we in our discourse use the terms, it is only a dream. And, when we use this only, that might be a moment where a psychoanalyst would listen carefully. One of the post-Freudians, Sandor Feldman, explored denials in people's discourse and pointed out that we should be very careful when someone says, by the way, or before I forget, or honestly, believe me, frankly, or especially when someone says to tell the truth, or when someone says, I wasn't serious, or I didn't mean to hurt you, or it was just a joke. So behind, this kind of words or certain mannerism, there might be, exactly the opposite that the person is trying to hide with, negation, denial of the kind. Now, in the end of my speech, let me just briefly mention kind of this world of the digital, the new technology, the economy, which is presumably based of knowledge. Now, people who have been studying so-called knowledge economy have pointed out that maybe we are not living so much in the economy of knowledge, but rather the economy of ignorance. Now, the economy based on knowledge is supposed to promote sharing of knowledge. However, if we look at how these economies function, we can see that sharing of knowledge is more and more restricted. So Joan Roberts and John Armitage, who have looked carefully at knowledge economy, pointed out that the most important mechanism of knowledge economy is not necessarily its great dependence on intellectual abilities, but actually determination to inhibit intellectual capabilities. On the one hand, knowledge economy relies on the way knowledge is constantly restricted, patented, packaged, compartmentalized. But on the other hand, the sophisticated technologies that the knowledge economy exploits make it more and more difficult to understand how these technologies work. Now, if we take, for example, the large internet search engines like Google, we can say that we customers have no clue how the crucial algorithms work, what data is being collected from our searches, or whom it is sold. And while search engines are of great help to us, they are actually, in some way preventing often deep thinking, or, they're sort of kind of sometimes preventing us even to deal with anxiety when we come close to something that we do not know. I remember when I was studying philosophy in my first year, we had to read Kant's The Critique of Pure Reason. And this was, a heavy book and so difficult when you are 18 years old, suddenly start studying this, can be anxiety provoking. And I remember first reading the manuscript, not understanding anything, then, searching for some secondary knowledge, going back to it, about 3 times reading, and then finally getting some clue what is it about. I can imagine that in today's times, when I would experience an anxiety over the lack of knowledge, there would be an easy way out of this anxiety, going searching something on the internet for a quick explanation, or, procrastinating on the new social media and, sort of dealing with my painful anxiety in such a way that maybe I would kind of quickly forget what I was actually searching for. So we can say that new technology are opening all kinds of, new types of ignorances. On the one hand, we can easily ignore certain anxieties which might be beneficial when we are dealing with difficult knowledge. But on the other hand, new technologies, new social media are very much relying on our ignorance in regard to how they operate, what kind of data they're collecting, who is having access to the data, how the algorithms have been set. So this type of ignorance is incredibly beneficial for the world of the new technology. And, for the customer, for us, the user, it is very hard to in a way, understand, especially because data and algorithms are private property and we do not have access to knowledge behind them. So digital ignorance is here today with us at every corner. I'm, of course, not promoting a kind of a negative view of new technologies. They have been incredibly useful, but they are something that is opening, in a way, a necessary new inquiry into how ignorance is embedded in today's society. And since we are living in time of pandemic, I will finish my talk with the fact that, since I said at the start that every society is having its own ignorance, the pandemic times have always relied on various types of ignorance. First, societies have ignored usually the pandemic. That happened in the medieval times, it happened with the AIDS epidemic, it happened with COVID-19. At first, people in power have ignored or prevented information. Many countries found its own types of ignorance. I remember at the start of COVID-19, Erdogan was promoting some ideas, or the media close to Erdogan were promoting some ideas that maybe Turkish population will be spared COVID-19 because they have their genetic make is very strong and they might be genetically protected from COVID-19. Another theory, genetic theory, emerged also in Jordan. I remember reading in some of their scientific papers that Arab world has also a certain kind of a genetic advantage and that their lungs are stronger and that's why they will suffer less from the pandemic. Then we had American type of ignorance with Donald Trump, ignored the pandemic for quite a long time. Bolsonaro continues doing it. Mexican president has been also in this group. And of course, individuals in their lives have found always a variety of ways to ignore the danger of the virus. We see people who still ignore the pandemic, or we see people who, because of certain exhaustion, are using, willful ignorance as some kind of a strategy to, continue their lives. Now, ignorance, therefore, in pandemic times can be strategic, directed from the people in power, or it can be individual, which means that people are using ignorance so that they do not need to deal with the traumatic situation they are in. Understanding ignorance in times of crisis, like the pandemic, is essential for, preventing, a certain kind of development of the pandemic, and also for learning something about, traumatic social situations so that we might prevent the future ones to emerge. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata, for like always, for that inspiring talk and rich content. And I will just start. I mean, now we can directly open to the audience the questions. But I just wanted to start with that. We choose the theme as the post-digital ignorance, where we actually wanted to focus on this digital aspect of it. Now, in that sense, I mean, we are dealing also very much these days with artificial intelligence, and we are talking about that biased algorithms, biased learning models, etc. Now, just we can say artificial ignorance, then it can be another term maybe for relating to that word of new algorithms and artificial intelligence. You also worked a lot on the big data and related issues too. I mean, more in this field of digital technologies.
Yes, definitely. One of the chapters in my book is on the big data and ignorance related to it, because I think that precisely the whole world of big data relies on us not knowing what data is about, how it is collected. We are constantly giving agreement to our data. So I looked at the term informed consent. Now, there are quite similar things going on in medicine. We give consent in medicine without actually reading closely or thinking through what are we signing. So very few people would give consent if they were to read, the in detail what they are consenting to. Whenever we have surgery, we consent that we could die, that everything could go wrong. And of course, medicine started using these forms of informed consent after World War II because of many abuses that happened in World War II in the domain of medicine. And the idea, of course, is that people should be informed, that they should be conscious, and they should understand what they are, submitting themselves to. But at some point, we are closing our eyes and give consent, because otherwise we never would. Now, with big data, there have been researchers who have calculated how many informed consents we give as users of social media or just simple internet. And if people were to read all the small print in regards to the information that is collected about them, and they are consenting to this whenever we are accessing internet, or whenever we are opening particular internet pages and so on, we are giving consent. If people were to read those letters, they would spend half a year just reading those letters. And of course, when they were to come to the small print, they would probably not consent to majority of things that they are actually consenting. So here we have some kind of a forced choice. We are given a choice, and actually if we choose not to, we are denied access to the whole internet, to the essential connection. Now, this reminds me of Jacques Lacan's term forced choice. He used the example of choice, which is choice and actually not choice at the same time. When we encounter a robber and he says to us, your money or your life, we don't have a choice. If we choose money, we give life. We are killed, which means we cannot use money. So we can choose only one thing: give the money and then somehow survive life, which will be less enjoyable without money. Now, another type of forced choice existed in former Yugoslavia, At that time, we had obligatory military service for young men, and the idea was that this is like a choice, that a young conscript has to choose to become the soldier in the Yugoslav army. Now, one of my friends took seriously this choice when, he started serving in the army, and he was asked to freely become the member of the Yugoslav army. He said, if this is a choice, then I choose not to. And of course, he was immediately thrown into jail. So lots of situations in our life are not actually choice, although they appear to be a choice. And precisely with the big data, a lot of big data appears to be, that kind of a forced choice. If we do not accept to give the data, then we just have digital death, we can say. We are, denied access.
Another thing that you were saying in your book, this ignorance is not a new thing. We always needed to ignore, or we always ignored, but this ignorance may be more visible now with this digital. We are more aware that we are really ignoring things within this digital domain.
We are getting more and more aware, but still, I think we are still a lot in the dark exactly what's happening with the data. I remember just a few years ago, I was in Kiev in Ukraine, and there everywhere in the city you have free internet. So you public internet. You could connect, all around Kiev freely, easily, without paying. And I remember giving a talk and discussing ignorance with the audience and the big data. And I said, when you have the possibility to connect everywhere, of course the question is what's happening with your data. And the majority of my audience did not think that's a question. They were, very happy that they have this possibility. No one questioned who is behind, who is using the data. So if something is free, we know we need to be quite careful. There is usually no free lunch, that you pay with something. And now, we pay with our data. As they say, data is new oil, is the new gold. And we are, here the product which is sold and, used without our knowledge how it is used.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to turn to the participants. If any comments and questions. Yeah, Güven, you can.
Hi, do you see me? I'm trying to turn on my cam, but let me
Not
see.
Yet.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not very good with these technologies. Hi, Renata.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Hi, you're coming now. You're.
Yes,
Hello.
I think I'm in. Hi.
Hi.
So there are people who are ignorant, but they don't know that they are. In fact, you talk about your book, what's known as the Dunning-Kruger syndrome, people who cannot judge the level of their ignorance. In fact, disproportionately, they think that they are really knowledgeable about something that they are ignorant about. Now, that's one thing. It's an epistemic situation, it seems to me, or a state. If we look at somebody like Trump, who uses ignorance, I think, as a useful strategic tool, I am not sure if he's in the same category. He often actually brags about knowing everything better than the experts in the area, and he uses that to promote his own views about climate change. He says things are going to cool down, the pandemic is going to disappear soon, don't worry, and so forth. When ignorance is used as a strategic tool, what you call willful ignorance, versus when it's an epistemic state and some people who cannot actually judge that they are ignorant. I wonder if we're talking about the same category I mean, they are ignorance in some sense, but I wonder to what extent they need to be clumped together.
Yeah, with the way Trump reacted towards pandemic, we could see it was, using strategic ignorance, because later we learned that he actually had more knowledge about the virus than he appeared at the time. And so he was denying something that in some way he knew is dangerous. So that here I would say is strategic. Now, what is interesting with Trump, I think, is how he uses ignorance as a point of identification. Although he is, in his words saying that he knows and he has kind of innate knowledge about epidemiology or whatever, he claims that he is like a genius about himself, but in some way he's constantly showing the lack of knowledge in a kind of a narcissistic way, while he appears not to be bothered by it. And I think that lack of knowledge which comes through, which is sort of visible behind his bragging, and also kind of the lack of desire to know, even more, the lack of desire to know, I think that was an important point of identification for people who have voted for him. It was a certain recognition of being equal to him, and I think also him praising, his supporters and their type of ignorance created a very kind of, I would say, strong bond between of them, which really hold the society together throughout his presidency. And it might, of course, continue if he continues to be publicly present in the United States. So I would say that what he opened the door to is the door for the people not to feel ashamed for the lack of knowledge or their ignorance, even if he would not, call ignorance, but would call it, being a genius or whatever.
Right, and I think you're saying that he was doing this in a non-direct kind of way, because he wasn't promoting ignorance. He wasn't saying it's best to be ignorant, and here I am ignorant about the facts just as you are, so don't be ashamed. He was actually pretending to be the best expert on these issues, even though he was ignorant. And you think that was the point of identification with
I
his
think
base?
that the surmise of his message was the promotion of ignorance. So in between the lines, he was opening the doors for ignorance.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Güven. Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
We have several comments in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Either people want to read themselves, or I can read maybe the first questions aloud. From Burshin Altin Sai. Do we have a single term that fully defines the state that is opposite of ignorance?
Yeah, I think, the pursuit of knowledge. So knowledge is usually perceived as, the opposite of ignorance.
May I ask my question?
Yes.
Sorry. Hello.
Yes, Burcu.
Yes. Hello. Yeah.
I was trying to think about, you know, we are saying ignorant or ignorance. It's a general term, but on the opposite, we cannot find something that's that general. So maybe it is ignorance of something, not everything. If you know what I mean. I mean, there is no single state that defines the opposite of ignorance. We say knowledgeable, but so when we call it ignorance in general, that may not cover the state of that person or whatever, wholly. So we are ignorant of something, but maybe we are not ignorant of another thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, it's not so clear, but I was thinking about that. Not to be called ignorant, what should we be? Maybe.
Yeah, if you look in the ignorance studies, nowadays you have agnotology, the whole field of ignorance studies, you will see that the term ignorance is very, you know, kind of different in many different circumstances. So, you know, like sociologists would speak about strategic ignorance, then willful ignorance, then you will have, you know, in the psychoanalysis, you will have sort of like the mechanisms of unconscious at work where people are ignorant in an unconscious way. So ignorance is not a unified term. And on the opposite, you know, the knowledge would not, or truth or facts would not be unified term. That's at least I was trying to convey, you know, this in my brief talk, how, you know, from willful ignorance to strategic ignorance to not, you know, knowing that you are ignorant to the unconscious ignorance. Ignorance is sort of used in different contexts in a very different way. Or even, you know, when I said at the beginning, when we are speaking that people are feeling ignored, not acknowledged, here the term ignorance has completely different meaning.
Yes. Yes, it's defining partial situations in a way.
Yeah, totally partial. It's also interpreted, you know, in very different contexts, and quite often it is used in a pejorative way when we are accusing others of being ignorant, while very rarely speaking about our own ignorance, which is why, you know, Nicholas de Cusa tried to promote already in medieval times the term learned ignorance. Or, you know, in Zen Buddhism, you have, you know, as the biggest danger, ignorance of ignorance, you know, not understanding your own lacks of knowledge.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Öznur, would you like to ask your question yourself? It's much better. We are reading this.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm unable to turn on my camera, but I can ask my question myself.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. It was really wonderful. I really enjoyed your talk. And like recently, I'm quite interested in the new ways that we become ignorant due to new technologies, and you also mentioned them. And I was just reading this book of James Bridle, The New Dark Age, and he gives a lot of examples about how new technologies and how reliance on new technologies render us more and more ignorant in many ways. Like one of the examples is the GPS deaths. Like people rely too much on GPS that they even got lost in desolate roads. So like they miss all the signs of the outside reality, and they get into very like weird roads and they get lost and they even die out of it. And he also mentions the autopilot, like half pilots, like even very well-trained pilots, rely too much on autopilot, and sometimes they make big mistakes just because of that. So this is quite interesting. What do you think about how our conception of agency has changed based on that?
That's very interesting. Yes, I have learned that, you know, people who have used always GPS and have never used maps have real problems when GPS is not working, or, you know, just like as if they don't know how to read maps, and you know, that is quite interesting. So in some way it is truly, you know, becoming like something is changing with us, you know, personally. Now, however, we can also say another thing with the new technologies, which is that we rely, you know, so much with on the new technologies to try to change ourselves. If you look at all the new technologies that we use for self-improvement, you know, we are using Fitbit, we are using all kinds of apps to monitor everything about our body, and especially to monitor our productivity. There are so many, you know, apps which are trying to make us, you know, more efficient, which are helping us to fight against procrastination, and so on. And here, the interesting thing is that we often completely ignore the fact that these apps are collecting data about us and are selling information about us, especially, you know, those who are free, I guess even more, but I guess that those we are paying are also, you know, relying on the data they are collecting about us. So new technology is opening, you know, a kind of a passion for improvement, but is also kind of opening the doors to self-surveillance. So we observe a change in subjectivity in today's times, dominated by technology, by artificial intelligence. And I think for psychoanalysts, it's really interesting to study, you know, this kind of self-surveillance. Now, psychologists have looked into the question, you know, how can people change? And quite a lot of discussion has been about, you know, the whether, you know, the self-discipline relies on, you know, our you know, volition being like a kind of a, our will being like a muscle. So if we are trying to change too much in too many directions, we might get fatigued too much. So maybe we should focus on one change and then on another, and so on. But, you know, people who know a little bit about psychoanalysis would know that, you know, people are not to be taken in a kind of a utilitarian way. You know, utilitarian reasoning was, you know, an optimistic reasoning, meaning that people are trying to maximize their well-being and minimalize their pain. Now, if psychoanalysis is pointing out something, it is that truth is exactly the opposite. People might do everything, you know, against their well-being and find enjoyment in pain. So all this obsession to use technology, you know, for self-improvement in some way opens up the door for still another type of ignorance, and that is that we easily ignore the technology that we buy at first or start using at first to improve ourselves. If you think how many apps you download and you never used, or, you know, how quickly you can forget about your plans for self-improvement. So very quickly, ignorance plays an important role in us in sticking with, I would say, our pain, or, you know, in sticking with our procrastination, or, you know, whatever we are doing. And here it is quite good to remember the old work of an Austrian philosopher, Robert Fahler, who was sort of about, I would say, 15, 20 years ago, speaking about interpassivity. Now he was questioning why are people photocopying books and then never read them, or why are people recording films on their devices and then never watch them. And Fowler's conclusion was that they were enjoying in some interpassivity. So when we photocopy the book, it is that we can do other things, but it is almost as if the photocopy machine has read the book for us, or our recording machine has watched the film for us, and we can do something else. So like in the past, before technology, people have used in Buddhism praying meals. So the praying meal would pray for them, and they could do something else. Or like even in some countries, like Serbia is an example here, for funerals you hire women who cry. So here too we could observe this interpassivity, that someone else is performing a task for us, and we can ignore the task ourselves. And technology in some way allows us more and more this kind of ignorance when apps are performing, or we are imagining that by having the app the task has already been done. Let's say that I download a meditation app, very quickly I forget about it. It is almost as if the app is continuing meditating for me, and I can do something more enjoyable in my day.
Well, you already mentioned that our team in 2008 was interpassivity, actually.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and Robert Fowler was the keynote. Yeah,
fantastic. He's a good friend.
Yeah, and what I was saying, when I came to Berlin, I immediately started using that GPS. It's after 2 years, I realized I have no idea about the city. So then I stopped with it and just tried to find myself, my bodily navigation. And I would, if there is not any other question, or I will maybe have one more, but looking forward for questions or comments. Okay, I just wanted to come back. When we started this with this team, the post-digital ignorance for me as a kind of, I took it as a kind of political stance. So it is very much related to somehow to the consciousness. So I just wanted to ask between these terms, consciousness, unconsciousness, and ignorance. How would you connect them, and what would you say about that?
Yeah, it's something the unconscious often, has a certain knowledge, something, is kind of close to what might be a truth for the subject, which the subject consciously does not acknowledge, does not deal with, or sometimes has repressed it, pushed aside. Now ignorance is one of the strategies of repression in psychoanalysis. So it would be a strategy to push out of consciousness something, although the subject, as I said before, might want to know, he or she would do everything not to come close to truth, so that his or her consciousness cannot deal with. So, which is why Lacan used the term passion for ignorance and not passion for knowledge. So people passionately embrace not knowing, although in consciously they might claim that they are trying to do the opposite. Ignorance for some might also, be very much related, a strategy to deal with trauma. So when we are traumatized, ignorance might be strategy of survival, again, not coming close to something that is too much for our consciousness to bear. That would be, like in the psychoanalytic context, the power of ignorance, mostly we could say related to at least a temporary survival or a temporary self-preservation. And of course, very quickly, the strategies of ignorance, denial, or negation that we are using are, undermined by our unconscious. Against these strategies, it might be that, with our slips of tongue, or in our dreams, or in any other ways, that there is a return of the repressed, that the barriers that we are posing are overrun, and that in some way our suffering or our trauma, or the truth of our desire, which has been pushed aside, comes in an unexpected way to the surface, without us, of course, consciously recognizing it, or without us being able to deal with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. I am sorry, I cannot turn on my camera to try to finalize, maybe.
So you are ignored.
by my computer or by the BB,
yeah.
The system. Okay, is there other comments? No. Okay, again, sorry for not turning on my camera.
Sorry, Ekmel, on YouTube, Yusuf Elidrisi, he wants to ask a question if.
Yeah, he can. Yes, sure. Can you reply him that he can ask there? I cannot write here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you maybe read the question? Because I don't see the YouTube.
Yeah. Okay, it's coming. Yusuf is also one of the creators from Casablanca, KounAktif. He is one of the partners, Network knows of the festival. And I wish he was here, actually. Okay, his question is, does ignorance mean being illiterate? Can we consider knowledge of life and actual knowledge? What are the categories of ignorance, if there is any?
No, it does not mean to be illiterate, not at all. And actually, we can have, perfect education, or, all kinds of information, and we are still, ignoring a certain, situation. So in the psychoanalytic point of view, as I said before, it has to do with the unconscious, with something that consciously we cannot admit in the social setting. As I said before, ignorance is often, strategic, so people can have a lot of information or even have an illusion of living in the knowledge-based economy, as we are saying today, and then all kinds of strategies are used behind to limit the knowledge, to limit access to it. So when we say that we are living in the knowledge-based economy, we can definitely say that we have a lot of knowledge collected, a lot of knowledge, in some way shared, but shared in a way only in small groups. So who has access to this knowledge might be one strategy at work in the economy, which is based on knowledge. There are patterns, there are all kinds of limitations. Let me take the example of scientific journals and ignorance related to it. So science is improving. Scientists are constantly writing new studies, new articles, publishing them in prestigious journals. But access to these prestigious journals is so limited that you have to be at the good university to have access to majority of these journals, or you have to pay. If you are an individual, you have to pay a lot to read a particular article. So here we see that scientists are using often public funding, and they are working for free when they are writing articles. They're editors, often that's also unpaid position, or they are writing reviews, comments on other scientists' articles. But then this knowledge that they produce becomes limited, becomes property of journals, and you have to, that someone is profiting a lot, especially the scientific journals is profiting a lot from selling it and from limiting access to it. What was publicly funded then becomes something that public money has to pay once more. So usually scientific institutions are paying then for the access to the work, to read the work that they themselves produced. Here we can see that knowledge and the limitation of knowledge are key for the knowledge-based society today.
Okay, thank you. I managed, I guess, to come back, although it is a bit dark here.
See you.
Thank you very much, Renata.
Thank you.
50 minutes, it's already more than 1.5 hours. Thank you very much for your contribution and everything.
Thank you, Ekmel. Thank you, amberPlatform, for the invitation.
Yeah, welcome every time. It's a pleasure to work with you and talk.
It's my pleasure.
And before leaving, I will just remind that Princeton University Press has 20% discount if you use this code here, and the link is here for the A Passion for Ignorance for the book. So it is on chat for the ones interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.